Claire, put the phone down. Nolan Pierce had worked for Claire Whitmore for 4 years, and he had never spoken to his boss like that. She barely looked up. Freezing rain rattled against the conference room windows 30 floors above downtown Providence. Most of Whitmore Architecture's staff had already gone home before the roads got worse, but Claire was still leading a video call, one hand gripping the edge of the table. Her face had gone pale. "I'm fine," she said. "You almost fell." "I stood up too fast." Then her fingers slipped from the table. Nolan caught her before her shoulder hit the glass wall. 20 minutes earlier, he had been heading home himself. His 10-year-old daughter, Sadie, was waiting at his parents' house with a half-finished science project and strict instructions that he bring poster board. Nolan had promised 7 o'clock. Being a widowed father had turned promises into something close to sacred. It had also given him a habit he rarely noticed anymore. When something went wrong, Nolan didn't ask who wanted help. He handled it. "Before we go further, how old are you? Where are you watching from? And have you ever had to step in when someone insisted they were fine?" Claire tried to straighten. "I have another call in 12 minutes. "No, you don't." "Nolan." He was already calling for medical help. Her expression sharpened. "I said I'm fine. And I heard you." He gave the dispatcher their location, described Claire's symptoms, and followed the instructions exactly. By the time paramedics arrived, Claire had stopped arguing. Nolan texted his mother. "Emergency at work. I'll explain later. Tell Sadie I'm sorry." The reply came almost immediately. "She's safe. Go." At the hospital, Nolan expected his part to be over. It wasn't. Claire had no spouse waiting, no sibling on the way, no friend rushing through the emergency room doors. Just Nolan, still wearing his charcoal winter jacket, sitting beneath fluorescent lights with a forgotten roll of blue poster boards sticking out of his work bag. Hours later, Claire was awake, stable, exhausted, and irritated by every question she couldn't answer with certainty. A staff member handed her paperwork. "Who should we list as the person to contact if we need to reach someone?" Claire unlocked her phone. Nolan deliberately looked away. He sent Sadie another message instead. "Still here. Save the volcano for me." 3 dots appeared. Then, "Grandpa says our volcano looks like a potato." Nolan smiled. "Mr. Pierce." He looked up. The staff member was checking the form. Claire's handwriting was unmistakable. On the contact line, she had written, "Nolan Pierce." He stared at it, then at her. Claire seemed almost embarrassed that he had noticed. "You have partners," Nolan said quietly. "Executives. People you've known longer than me." "I know." "Then why my name?" For the first time that night, Claire had no quick answer. She looked down at the form, her fingers resting over the letters she had just written. "Finally," she said, "because when I couldn't handle something myself, you were the person who stayed." Nolan thought that explained the name. He had no idea yet how dangerous it could become when a man who needed to be useful met a woman who had finally allowed herself to need someone. Claire hated the passenger seat. Nolan figured that out before they made it 3 blocks from the hospital. "You're braking too late," she said. "I'm doing 28. The road is ice." "Which is why I'm doing 28. Claire glanced toward his dashboard. "The limit is 35. "Thank you for confirming my point." She folded her arms and looked out the window. 2 days had passed since the emergency. The doctors had ruled out anything immediately life-threatening, but Claire still needed follow-up testing. Medication for the dizziness also meant she had been told not to drive for several days. For a woman who ran an architecture firm with more than 100 employees, surrendering her car keys seemed to bother her almost as much as the hospital stay. Nolan pulled his dark SUV in front of her townhouse. "You're home. I noticed. You have food." Claire gave him a look. That was a question, not an inspection. "Yes, Nolan. I have food." "Good." He started to reach for her bag. Claire grabbed it first. "I can carry 8 pounds. Nolan raised both hands. "Apparently, I'm learning boundaries today." For the first time since the hospital, she almost smiled. His phone buzzed. "Sadie." Nolan answered immediately. "Hey, kiddo. Grandpa bought the wrong glue." "There's no wrong glue." "There absolutely is." Nolan closed his eyes. Claire watched him. "I'll get the right one on my way home." "You said that about the poster board." "That was an emergency." Sadie paused. "Is your boss okay?" Nolan glanced at Claire. "She's okay." Claire looked away, but her expression softened. "I'll be home by 6, Nolan promised. When he ended the call, Claire asked, "You missed something because of me?" "My daughter survived." "That isn't what I asked." Nolan recognized the tactic. No. I made a choice. Claire studied him for a moment. I have another appointment Thursday. I know. How? You told me at discharge. And you remember everybody's schedule? Occupational hazard. Nolan coordinated facilities for 3 Whitmore architecture offices. Broken heating systems, security calls, contractors who arrived on the wrong day. His job rewarded the same instinct fatherhood had sharpened. Notice the problem. Fix the problem. Move on. I can get a car service, Claire said. You could. But. No but. That seemed to surprise her. Nolan put the SUV in park. Claire stared through the windshield at freezing rain collecting along the curb. Finally, she said, "Would you drive me?" Nolan looked at her. It was the first time she had actually asked. Yes. 1 week, Claire said. Appointments only. Then you stop rearranging your life. Deal. Thursday became another appointment. Then a pharmacy stop. Then a follow-up the next Monday. The drives changed gradually. At first, Claire answered emails the entire way. By the 4th trip, her phone stayed in her coat pocket for almost 10 minutes. Nolan learned she hated hospital coffee, loved old brick buildings, and could identify badly designed public spaces before they had even parked. Claire learned Nolan kept granola bars in his glove compartment because Sadie was always hungry after school, and that he called his parents every Sunday even though they lived 15 minutes away. Nothing dramatic happened. That was what made it dangerous. Dependence arrived disguised as routine. One evening, Nolan dropped Claire off after a follow-up appointment as light snow covered the sidewalks. You don't have to wait until I get inside, she said. I know. She closed the door, walked toward her townhouse, then turned back. Nolan was still there. Claire lifted one hand. He waved and drove away. Inside, she hung up her wool coat and noticed something uncomfortable. The house felt quieter than it had before. Across town, Nolan stopped at a craft store and bought Sadie the correct glue. He also noticed Claire had mentioned being almost out of groceries. Without thinking much about it, he reached for a shopping cart. The 1-week agreement had ended that morning. Nolan knew that. He pushed the cart forward anyway. The groceries were still outside Claire's townhouse when Nolan reached the office the next morning. He knew because she called him at 8:17. Did you leave 2 bags on my porch? Nolan looked up from a maintenance report. Depends. Are you calling to complain or say thank you? Nolan. Yes. You bought groceries. You said you were almost out. I also said our arrangement was over. They're groceries, Claire. Not a legally binding relationship. There was silence. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed. It was brief, but Nolan carried the sound with him for the rest of the morning. What began as a small favor slowly became a pattern. Claire returned to the office on a reduced schedule, wearing a navy wool coat over tailored work clothes, and moving with the impatience of someone offended by her own recovery. Nolan noticed everything. When a site inspection appeared on her calendar during a forecast for heavy snow, he suggested moving it. When documents piled up in her office, he arranged for secure delivery to her townhouse. When she mentioned missing lunch during a meeting, food somehow appeared 20 minutes later. Claire protested, less each time. That should have warned him. Instead, Nolan interpreted it as proof that he was helping. One Wednesday afternoon, his phone vibrated while he was checking a heating problem on the 4th floor. Sadie's. School, volunteer build night, 4:30 p.m. Nolan froze. Damn it, it was already 4:47. He had promised Sadie he would help supervise the science project tables. He arrived at school nearly 40 minutes late, still wearing his work boots and gray quarter-zip sweater. Sadie was sitting beside her volcano with Nolan's father. The volcano no longer looked like a potato. It looked worse. Hey, kiddo. Sadie glanced at the clock. I know. Grandpa came. I can see that. I got stuck handling something at work. For your boss. Nolan hesitated. Sadie started packing paintbrushes into a plastic container. She needed somebody to move some things around. Did she ask you? She didn't have to. Sadie stopped. That answer bothered her more than Nolan expected. Why not? Because I knew what needed doing. Sadie zipped the container shut. But did she ask? Nolan exhaled. No, Sadie nodded once. That wasn't my question anyway. What wasn't? I asked if she asked you. You keep telling me she needed you. Nolan stared at his daughter. At 10 years old, Sadie had somehow found a distinction he had spent 37 years avoiding. On the drive home, he tried to dismiss it. Claire was recovering. She had responsibilities. He was making things easier. There was nothing wrong with that. The next morning, Claire appeared beside his desk holding coffee. For you. Nolan looked suspiciously at the cup. Should I be concerned? I'm capable of gratitude. I'll notify the board. She smiled. Then she placed a folder beside him. My follow-up schedule. Since you keep asking. Nolan looked down. Claire had given it to him willingly. Something warm settled in his chest. Trust, he told himself. That was all it was. But later, when Claire's assistant mentioned an upcoming site visit that might be exhausting, Nolan immediately started thinking through alternatives. He could move the meeting, arrange transportation, shift the contractor schedule, make the problem disappear before Claire ever had to deal with it. Across town that evening, Sadie struggled with a crooked piece of her science project. Nolan reached over automatically. I'll fix it. Sadie pulled it away. I can do it. His hand remained suspended between them. For a second, Nolan almost insisted. Then he remembered her question. Did she ask you? He slowly lowered his hand. But at work the next morning, when Claire's calendar opened on his screen during a facilities coordination meeting, Nolan still found himself looking for problems she hadn't asked him to solve. The first time Claire told Nolan about her father, they were sitting in his SUV outside her townhouse, while snow buried the windshield one slow inch at a time. Neither of them seemed eager to open the door. My father hated hospitals, Claire said. Nolan glanced at her. Most people do. No. He hated what happened after them. She rubbed her thumb along the edge of her glove. When he got sick, everyone started deciding things for him. My mother. My brother. Doctors. Everybody said they were protecting him. Nolan waited. They stopped asking what he wanted. Claire looked through the windshield. By the end, he was treated like being sick had made him incapable of having an opinion. There was no anger in her voice now. That made it heavier. So you learned to handle everything yourself, Nolan said. Claire gave him a tired smile. Cheaper than therapy. Nolan smiled back, but the warning hidden inside her story passed right by him. What he heard was that Claire had spent years making sure she never needed anyone. What he felt was an even stronger desire to make things easier for her. A few days later, she stayed late for a design review. By then, the worst of the winter storm had passed, but sidewalks were still lined with gray snowbanks. Claire came downstairs wearing her navy wool coat and found Nolan waiting near the lobby. You're still here. Facilities problem. Real one. Mostly real. She laughed. He drove her home. This time, they talked about him. Nolan told her how his wife's death had changed ordinary things overnight. Lunches, permission slips, dentist appointments, grocery lists. When Sadie needs something, there isn't another parent to notice if I miss it. That sounds exhausting. It was. Nolan considered that. I got good at it. Claire looked at him for a moment. Those aren't the same thing. He didn't answer. Outside her townhouse, Claire unbuckled her seatbelt, but didn't immediately leave. I slept better this week, she said. Medication working? Maybe. She looked directly at him. I think it's knowing you'll answer if I call. Nolan felt something shift between them. Quiet, warm, difficult to name. You can call. I know. Claire stepped out and closed the door. Nolan watched until she was safely inside. Driving home, he replayed her words. Knowing you'll answer. To Claire, it had been an admission of trust. To Nolan, it sounded almost like responsibility. By the time he reached his house, Sadie was asleep on the couch beneath a blanket, her science project sitting crookedly on the dining table. Nolan carried his daughter to bed. Then he returned downstairs and noticed one side of the volcano leaning. His first instinct was to fix it. His hand stopped inches away. He remembered Sadie pulling the project from him. I can do it. Nolan left the volcano untouched. Then his phone buzzed. A message from Claire. Home safe. Thank you. Nolan smiled and typed back. Anytime. He didn't yet understand that leaving something in another person's hands was a lesson he had only learned in one room of his life. 3 weeks after the hospital, Claire walked into Nolan's office holding a printed itinerary. Boston, she said. Nolan looked at the page. Friday. Client presentation. One night. His eyes moved to the departure time, hotel information, and Saturday return. You're going? My doctor cleared me. For travel. For work. That wasn't my question. Claire gave him a look. You've been spending too much time around me. Nolan leaned back. You still get dizzy. Occasionally. You had an episode Tuesday. And then I sat down. That's not reassuring. Claire folded the itinerary. Nolan, I appreciate the concern. I really do. But I spoke with my doctor. I know what the limits are, and I'm going. There was nothing uncertain in her voice. He should have stopped there. Instead, Nolan spent the rest of the morning noticing everything that could go wrong. The train schedule required Claire to leave early. The presentation was followed by a client dinner. Her senior partner, Daniel Reeves, was already attending. The firm had contingency procedures for leadership absences. By lunch, Nolan had built an argument in his head so complete that it no longer felt like an argument. It felt like common sense. He called the operations manager. Nolan did not have authority to cancel Claire's trip, and he knew it. So he framed the conversation as a concern. He mentioned the recent hospital emergency. He mentioned the continuing dizziness. He mentioned that Daniel could lead the presentation. What Nolan did not mention was that Claire had explicitly told him her doctor had cleared her to go. By 4 o'clock, operations had spoken with Daniel and 2 senior partners. The presentation was reassigned. Claire would join remotely from Providence. Problem solved. At least that was what Nolan told himself. At 4:26, Claire appeared at his office door. She wasn't angry yet. That was worse. Did you speak to Martin? Nolan stood. Claire, did you? Yes. Her jaw tightened. You told him about my dizziness. I told him you were still recovering. That was private. I was trying to keep you from pushing too hard. I told you my doctor cleared me. And I thought you were rushing back because you hate needing help. Claire stared at him. So you decided for me? No. Operations made the call. Because you gave them information they would never have had otherwise. Nolan felt the defense forming automatically. I was worried about you. That does not make this okay. You ended up in an emergency room 3 weeks ago. And that scared you. So now I lose the right to make my own decisions? That's not what I said. It's what you did. The office outside them had gone quiet. Claire stepped inside and closed the door. When I was at that hospital, I wrote your name on that form because I trusted you. I know. No, Nolan. I don't think you do. Her voice cracked slightly, but she steadied it. I told you what happened to my father. I told you exactly what it felt like watching people make choices for him because they were convinced they knew better. Nolan went still. The snowy night in his SUV came back all at once. They stopped asking what he wanted. He had heard every word. He just hadn't understood that she had been telling him where the line was. I wasn't trying to control you. I believe you. That answer hurt more than accusation would have. Claire continued. My family believed they were helping my father too. Nolan looked down. For the first time, good intentions sounded less like a defense. I should have asked you. Yes. I know what you thought. Claire's eyes were wet now, but her voice remained firm. You thought if you could remove the risk, you could remove the problem. Nolan had no answer. Because that was exactly what he did. With broken boilers. With missed appointments. With Sadie's crooked science project. With grief. And now with Claire. She placed the folded itinerary on his desk. I need my medical information to stay private from now on. It will. And I need you to stop managing things I haven't asked you to manage. Nolan swallowed. Okay. Claire reached for the door. Claire. She stopped. I'm sorry. She looked back at him. I know you are. Then she left. Nolan sat alone as the office emptied around him. His phone buzzed. A photo from Sadie. Her finished volcano leaned slightly to the left. The paint was uneven, and one side had collapsed near the base. Underneath, she had written, I fixed it myself. Nolan stared at the picture for a long time. For once, the thing he loved had been imperfect, vulnerable, and entirely outside his control. And maybe that was the point. By Monday morning, Nolan no longer had access to Claire's calendar. The change was small enough that nobody outside the company would have noticed. To Nolan, it felt enormous. Martin from operations stopped by his office shortly after 9. Claire asked that anything involving her travel, schedule, or personal logistics go through me or her assistant. Nolan nodded. Understood. Martin hesitated. For what it's worth, nobody thinks you were trying to hurt her. That doesn't mean I didn't cross a line. No, Nolan appreciated that Martin didn't soften it. There was no dramatic punishment. No public humiliation. Claire didn't fire him or threaten his job. He remained facilities coordinator, responsible for the same buildings, contractors, repairs, and safety systems he had managed before. She simply took back what had always belonged to her. Her decisions. For the next week, Nolan saw Claire mostly through glass walls and across conference rooms. They were professional, polite, nothing more. The distance bothered him more than anger would have. At home, he tried to bury himself in normal routines. Dinner, laundry, homework. On Wednesday evening, Sadie sat at the kitchen table rebuilding part of her science display for the school showcase. One cardboard support kept collapsing. Nolan watched her tape it twice. It fell again. "You need to reinforce the bottom," he said. "I know. You're putting the tape too high." "I know." He watched her try again. His fingers practically itched. Finally he stood. "Here. Give it to me." Sadie pulled the cardboard toward her chest. "Dad." "What?" "You're doing it again." Nolan stopped. "Doing what?" Sadie stared at him with the exhausted patience only a 10-year-old could somehow make insulting. "Taking over. This is cardboard." "It's my cardboard." Despite himself, Nolan laughed. "Sadie didn't. I want to fix it. You've been trying for 20 minutes. So I can fix it in 30 seconds. Sadie looked down at the crooked display. Then she said quietly, "Maybe I want to know I can." The words landed harder than Nolan expected. He sat back down. For several minutes, he said nothing. Sadie tried again. The support collapsed. Nolan stayed in his chair. She changed the angle, added another strip of tape, and pressed it firmly against the base. This time it held. Sadie grinned. "See?" "Yeah." Nolan smiled. "I see." Later that night, after Sadie went to bed, Nolan stood alone in the kitchen staring at the finished display. He thought about the years after his wife died. People had praised him constantly. "You're incredible. I don't know how you do everything. Sadie is lucky to have you." He had built an identity around being the person who could handle anything. Because handling things meant nobody had to see how terrified he had been. If he stayed useful, he didn't have to feel helpless. And somewhere along the way, usefulness had become the way he measured love. The next morning, Nolan passed Claire near the elevators. She wore a charcoal coat over a cream sweater, lighter than the heavy winter layers she had needed weeks earlier. Outside, dirty snow was melting along the sidewalks. "Morning," she said. "Morning." The elevator arrived. Claire stepped inside. Nolan could have apologized again. Could have explained himself better. Could have asked whether she was still angry. Instead, he held the door while she entered. "Have a good day, Claire." She looked at him, almost surprised. "You too." The doors closed. For once, Nolan let someone walk away without following them to make sure everything was okay. It felt terrible. It also felt like the first honest thing he had done in a while. By the first week of March, the snowbanks along downtown Providence had shrunk into gray piles at the edges of parking lots. Nolan was leaving a mechanical room when Daniel Reeves caught up with him. "You heard about Claire?" Nolan stopped. "What about her?" Follow-up results came back. His old instinct woke immediately. "Is she okay?" "She's okay. But apparently there are a couple ways forward. Different treatment schedules, different impact on work." Nolan waited. Daniel lowered his voice. "She's leaning toward the option that keeps her traveling." Of course she was. Nolan could already see the consequences. Long days. Airports. Client dinners. Claire pretending exhaustion was inconvenience. What did her doctor recommend? Daniel shrugged. "I don't know." Nolan did. Or at least he knew how to find out more. 6 weeks earlier, he would have started making calls before Daniel finished the sentence. Instead, Nolan said, "Then it's her decision." Daniel looked surprised. "You're not going to talk to her?" "If she asks." That afternoon, Nolan passed Claire twice without mentioning it. The restraint felt unnatural. At 5:40, most employees had left when Claire appeared at his doorway. She wore a dark green blazer beneath a light wool coat, the heavy winter layers finally disappearing with the weather. "You know," she said. Nolan sat down his pen. "Daniel mentioned you had some decisions to make." And nothing." Claire stepped inside. "You know which option I'm considering?" "I can guess." "You think it's a mistake?" Nolan hesitated. "I think it could be." Her expression tightened slightly. "Then why haven't you tried to stop me?" There it was. The question old Nolan would never have understood. He leaned back. "Because you didn't ask me to decide." Claire said nothing. "You asked your doctors questions," Nolan continued. "You know the risks. You know your job better than I do. If you want my opinion, I'll give it. And if I don't, then I'll keep my opinion to myself." A faint, almost disbelieving smile touched her face. "That sounds painful for you." "It's been a difficult week." Claire laughed. The sound disappeared quickly, but the tension in the room changed. She sat across from him. "What do you think?" Nolan took a breath. "I think you're choosing the option that lets your life look the most like it did before the hospital." Claire's smile faded. "That doesn't automatically make it wrong," he added. "But I think you should ask yourself whether you want it because it's best for you." or because changing anything feels like admitting something happened? Claire looked toward the window. And what would you choose? That's exactly the question I'm trying not to answer. Nolan. He shook his head. I'll tell you what worries me. I'll help you compare schedules if you want. I'll drive you somewhere if you ask. But I'm not choosing for you again. Claire studied him. You really mean that? I'm trying to. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Claire said quietly, I haven't made the decision yet. Okay. I thought I had. What changed? She looked at him. You didn't tell me what to do. Nolan almost laughed at the irony. Claire stood to leave, then paused. The first night at the hospital, I thought trusting someone meant giving up control. Nolan looked at her. And after what happened with Boston, she continued, I thought maybe I'd been right. She opened the door. Now I'm not sure. After she left, Nolan sat alone. He wanted to know what she would choose. He wanted to protect her from choosing wrong. But for the first time, he understood that those were his feelings to manage, not her decision to surrender. 2 days later, Claire called Nolan at 7:12 in the morning. He was standing in his kitchen, spreading peanut butter on toast while Sadie searched for a missing sneaker. I need help, Claire said. Nolan stopped moving. A month earlier, those words would have sent him straight into problem-solving mode. Now he asked, what kind? There was a pause. Then Claire said, transportation and scheduling. Nothing else. Okay. Her preferred treatment plan required several appointments over the next 6 weeks. It would let her keep more control over her work, but the available appointment times created conflicts with meetings and transportation. Claire had nearly chosen the easier option simply because it disrupted fewer people. Nolan understood the temptation. What do you want me to do? I want to know what's actually possible before I decide. Not what should I choose. What's possible? I can do that. At work, Nolan gathered only the information Claire had specifically requested. He checked transportation options, identified which office obligations could be covered under normal company procedures, and listed the scheduling conflicts without changing a single one. By late afternoon, he placed one sheet of paper on the conference table between them. Claire read it carefully. You didn't move anything? No, call anyone on my behalf. Only the transportation services you asked me to contact. Tell anyone why. No, Claire looked up. Nolan leaned back. I'm learning. Her mouth curved slightly. Then she reached the final page. If I choose this plan, Thursday becomes difficult. Yes. I could cancel the review meeting. You could. Or move the appointment. You could. Claire narrowed her eyes. You're enjoying this. More than I expected. She laughed, then became serious. What would you do? Nolan looked at the schedules. Old Nolan had an answer ready. He still did. I think moving the appointment creates problems you shouldn't have to create just to make everyone else comfortable. Claire waited. But that's my opinion. And if I keep the meeting, I'll think you're being stubborn. That sounds familiar. It should. She smiled. Then the smile disappeared. I'm afraid if I start changing my life around this, I won't know when to stop. Nolan understood. After his wife died, he had spent years believing that if he loosened his grip on one responsibility, everything else might collapse behind it. You don't have to decide what the rest of your life looks like today, he said. Claire looked at him. You only have to decide what Thursday looks like. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she crossed out the review meeting herself. I'm keeping the appointment. Nolan nodded. That's probably what I would have picked. I know. How? Your face. He laughed. Claire gathered the papers, but before she could stand, her phone rang. She listened for less than a minute before her expression changed. When the call ended, she stared at the table. What happened? The transportation service can't guarantee the return trip. Driver shortage. Nolan immediately saw the solution. He could rearrange his afternoon. Call his father. Have Sadie picked up. Drive Claire himself. Move the contractor inspection scheduled for 3. The entire plan assembled itself inside his head in seconds. Claire looked at him. Nolan said nothing. Well, she asked. I have an idea. I assumed you had 12. Probably. She waited. Nolan forced himself not to reach for his phone. Do you want them? Claire studied him, understanding exactly what he was doing. Yes, she said. I do. Only then did Nolan pull out his phone. He showed her the options. A later car service. A train connection. A company-approved driver. And, if she wanted it, a ride from him after he finished Sadie's school pickup. Claire considered each one. Not Nolan. Claire. Finally, she tapped the last option. That one. You're sure? Yes. Nolan nodded. Then I'll be there. Claire looked down at the paper, then back at him. I used to think the safest person was someone who would take over when things got hard. Nolan smiled faintly. And now? Now I think it might be someone who stays long enough to let you choose. Outside the conference room windows, rain washed the last dirty traces of winter from the sidewalks. Nolan looked at Claire and realized something had changed between them. Not because she needed him less. Because, for the first time, neither of them was afraid of that. 3 weeks later, Nolan found himself back at the same hospital. This time, nobody was rushing through emergency room doors. Claire stood beside him at the registration desk, looking healthier than she had in months. Early spring sunlight poured through the windows, and her light beige trench coat had replaced the heavy wool coats she had worn through the Providence winter. Nolan had driven her because she asked. Nothing more. That distinction mattered now. I'll be about 2 hours, Claire said. I'll be here. You can leave. I can. She smiled. But you won't. You asked me for a ride home. Fair enough. The receptionist slid a form toward Claire. Nolan stepped away automatically, giving her privacy. Emergency contact? The receptionist asked. Claire looked down. For a moment, her pen didn't move. Then she wrote. Nolan didn't ask whose name she had chosen. He sat in the waiting room, answered work emails, and texted Sadie about dinner. Nearly 3 hours later, Claire returned. Tired, he asked. Yes. Want coffee? No food. Eventually. Want me to stop asking questions? Very much. Nolan grinned and stood. They had almost reached the exit when Claire stopped. I changed something today. Nolan waited. My emergency contact. He felt something tighten in his chest. Okay. Claire studied him. You're not going to ask? You'll tell me if you want me to know. For several seconds, she simply looked at him. Then she laughed softly. That might be the most irritatingly healthy thing you've ever said. Nolan opened the door for her. Outside, cool spring air moved through downtown Providence. They crossed the sidewalk toward his SUV. Claire stopped beside the passenger door. I wrote your name again. Nolan looked at her. The first time, she continued. I wrote it because I was scared and you were there. She held his gaze. Today I wrote it because I had time to think about who I wanted there. Nolan didn't reach for her. He didn't turn the moment into a promise she hadn't made. He simply nodded. I'm honored. Claire smiled. Good answer. That evening, Nolan invited her to dinner. Not because she needed transportation. Not because she needed groceries. Not because something had gone wrong. He asked because he wanted her there. Claire came carrying dessert and found Sadie at the kitchen table beside the crooked volcano that had somehow survived the school showcase. So you're the boss, Sadie said. Claire glanced at Nolan. Apparently. Sadie considered her carefully. Dad likes fixing things. I've noticed. He thinks he's good at it. I've noticed that too. Nolan pointed toward the kitchen. I can hear both of you. Sadie grinned. Claire laughed. And watching them, Nolan understood something he had spent years getting wrong. Love wasn't proving that someone couldn't manage without you. It was respecting them enough to believe they could, and staying when they chose not to do everything alone. There was another lesson in their story too, one larger than Nolan and Claire. Claire had wealth, authority, and a company carrying her name. Nolan was an employee, a widowed father balancing work, bills, school projects, and responsibilities that rarely waited for convenient timing. Those differences affected their lives. They never determined their worth. A person does not become more deserving of dignity because of a title, a large bank account, an expensive home, or an executive office. And someone struggling financially does not become smaller, less intelligent, or less worthy of respect. Money can change what people own. It should never change how human their hearts appear to us. Rich or poor, powerful or overlooked. Every person deserves basic respect, compassion, and the chance to be known beyond assumptions. Claire learned that needing another person did not make her weak. Nolan learned that caring for someone did not give him ownership over their choices. And perhaps that was why the name on the hospital form mattered so much in the end. The first time Claire wrote Nolan Pierce, she needed someone. The second time, she chose